Welcome to the Point Man Podcast. This is a mic'd up men's group of 4 Catholic fathers challenging each other to be the point men for their families.
I am a fighter. I am a fighter.
Welcome back to another great episode of the Point Man Podcast. We have an awesome guest lined up today, Mr. Brian Butler with Echo Community, based here in Covington, Louisiana. Why don't we get started with a verse? We'll go over to our sponsors after that, and then we'll start diving deep with Brian. Today, our verse is from Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will.
There is an absolute, and you know this, a war being waged right now against us and against our family. Listen to these statistics. 56% of divorces list pornography as one of the major factors leading to divorce. 56%. 60% of men in a survey said watching pornography decreased their desire to read or study God's word. C.S. Lewis said, what we practice, not what we preach, is usually our greatest contribution to conversations to others. What example are you setting for your family and community with your online behavior? If you're not personally struggling with porn, are you doing all you can to defend your family from the enemy? This is an attack that we need to guard our homes, to protect our families. Even if this is something that you're not struggling with, you still need, because we live in a pornographic culture, we need to guard our homes and guard our families. Lead the way for your wife and for your children by getting Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes is a software that is installed across all your devices, phones, laptops, desktops, iPads, all that, and monitors your online activity and reports. There's reports that go to an accountability partner. That's the other great part about Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes has also blocking technology that allows you to keep the pornography off your devices. This transparency in our online behaviors fosters integrity and deepens relationships. We can't fight this alone, and we need help. So you go online to Covenant Eyes. You actually, if you use the promo code POINTMAN, then you can get, I think, a 30-day free trial. So check out Covenant Eyes, put in Point Man, get your 30-day free trial today.
Very good.
That was great.
Very impressive.
All right. Clint, why don't you start us off with the check-in then?
Oh, man. Just, it was a very full weekend. My daughter just turned 11, my oldest daughter, and we had 10 girls spend the night on Saturday night.
Wow.
So that was interesting.
Yes.
And then, a few parties yesterday, and all of a sudden I'm back underneath the pile of work trying to make some progress. So, but all is well. Doing well. Thanks.
Nice.
I was wondering why you had that twitch in your left eye, but it makes sense now.
I've been twitching. Yeah. Like in the weeds.
Yeah.
For the weekend. So, but it was good.
Cool.
Drew, what about you?
Man, life is good. We've kind of passed the honeymoon phase of having our 5th child. And you're like, oh, this is it. Okay. Gotta just get ready for the next few months.
Yes, indeed.
So
How are the older ones embracing the baby?
They're doing good.
Yeah.
Family's good. It's all good.
Yeah.
So
Good.
Nothing to complain about.
What about you, Brian? Brian Butler.
I was just thinking what to report, and I'm excited about the fact that I sold a car this weekend for $300.
What?
Because we got it to 279,000 miles.
That's awesome.
I feel really good about that.
Was this the Pilot?
This was a Pilot, yeah.
That was a great car, man.
It was.
You look good in that car. All right.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Well, it was my wife's car, so
All right.
that's gone. So that was good to get that too. I like to get the most out of things.
Yeah.
And so I felt like we got
almost
the most out of that.
I mean, you could have gone 300,000.
I wanted 300, but I'm not going to act disappointed at
Yeah.
No, that's a good number.
Yeah.
Well, then it would have only been worth like $250.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess you got good call. Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, daughter had homecoming this weekend. That was good. So, yeah, lots going on.
What about you, Jason?
Well, the weekend was great. My second oldest was on the homecoming court for St. Paul's. That was a lot of fun. And then we had a homecoming brunch that I got to attend with the moms and singular dad. I got to go, so maybe post some pictures up of that. It was really fun. So, but a great weekend. It went by crazy fast, and now we've got a stretch of things ahead of us. So excited.
Right on. So I'm ready to get this show started, man. I just drank a cappuccino, record speed, just crushed a large chocolate chip cookie the size of my face. So I'm rip roaring.
It was a protein cookie, though, right?
Protein.
So that
protein
makes
based.
That's
sweet.
Trying to get muscle going. So.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, this show is really all about you today. And so we're going to just have a lot of fun. Why don't you start off with kind of the history of Echo Community and how we got here today, and then we're going to move on to theology of the body.
Yeah, so some people might be familiar with the fact a ministry called Delmox, and actually 2002 was the beginning of that outreach. A friend of mine that, good friend growing up and good friend in college, we were doing youth ministry together and just really felt like God was inspiring us to pour ourselves out for teenagers. And so we started doing a lot of talks and a lot of retreats at different spaces. And then I found the theology of the body and this work of St. John Paul II. And it really impacted my life in a dramatic way. It impacted my wife's life. And I started using that in our retreats. And also I was teaching high school at the time and in the classroom. And I started seeing the most powerful light bulbs go off in people's minds and hearts than any other way I had ever shared the gospel before. And I knew it was going to be something that I wanted to do a lot with. And over the next number of years, it became the focus of our ministry. And we started a retreat in 2010 that we called Echo. So we were Delmox Ministries, but we started this retreat called Echo, and it became like our most powerful outreach. And eventually people started to say as they would leave the retreat, I can't wait to get back to this Echo community. And we finally said, well, I guess that's actually our name. And it's a little easier to describe than Delmox, which was always a little confusing.
Who was the Delmox? It was
St. Thomas Aquinas, it was his nickname, and he was large and silent. And so people they nicknamed him that, saying that he was large and silent, but he was very pure of heart, very faithful in following God's call in his life. And I like the teachable moment, to be able to ask the question. Yeah. But the elevator door was starting to close, and trying to explain that out. And so Echo, specifically the word, comes straight from St. John Paul II's teaching, where he says that we have a distant echo in our hearts of original innocence. And hopefully today we can break that open a little bit as to what that means. So
awesome.
Yep. I love the reference too, because it points to the fact that, like, regardless of how rampant sin is in the world, that there is this hope, there's this, that speaking the truth and proclaiming God's word, we have the advantage because we're made for truth and we're made for love. I think a lot of times we just get overwhelmed with what's going on and maybe the bad news that, and I come back, I love the imagery of Peter stepping out on that boat and the storm. I think sometimes we're focusing so much on the storm around us that we forget that Christ himself is right there, that we can lock eyes and we can walk through all this.
And I had a gist of what you did, Brian. We had moved down here a couple years ago. Actually, it's a Honda Pilot story. Is new to the parish, new to the area. And you ever had like one of those days you're driving, you accidentally like hit the horn? That's happened to me. Maybe
accidentally, or
you just like I haven't seen a lot of guys like
call it an accident.
Guys that have muscles, just too many muscles, Whoops! Yeah. Oh gosh! Again. Well, I had one of those accidental moments, and you were crossing the street over by the police station, and I just remember you looking at me like, dude, I did nothing wrong. Why are you beeping at me? And I went to like wave, and you just stared me down like, what are you doing, bro? And I remember seeing you at Daily Mass, like, that guy is awesome. I want to get to know him, but I'd done the accidental honk.
You're fearless. You don't know that.
Yeah. So when we did get a chance to connect and you explained a little about Echo Community, I was like, man, that's powerful. So I would love to just maybe do a deep dive there, like a little bit more on what you're up to now in the community and where you see it going.
Yeah. And so you guys talked about this season being about authentic masculinity, and that's really a part of our mission statement, is like cultivating authentic masculinity and femininity in and through the lens of St. John Paul II's theology of the body. And that original innocence I referenced was a radical purity of heart that men and women had before the fall.
Yes.
When they were able to receive from God exactly what he was revealing. There was no dissonance between what God said and what they received, and they were able to be unified with each other and treat one another with the dignity and respect that God meant from the beginning.
Yeah.
And John Paul II teaches about how we can't go back to Eden, but we can, through the grace of Christ, start to live like that again, like start to live from that echo in our hearts. And so we do that through a lot of different methodologies. The message sort of stays the same, but the methodologies change according to the needs, with a lot of retreats and a lot of experiences for people. We do teach some things systematically, but rather than just a systematic sort of approach intellectually, we strive to be able to integrate this teaching and have it come alive in people's hearts and lives through things like the camping trip that happened a couple weeks ago that you knew about. We were trying to get a few of you guys to come, but it didn't work out. But maybe next time.
Yeah, that trip sounds awesome. Maybe better than Yosemite Falls.
Right. I got some pictures. If we can put that up, Nathan, next time. Okay, that's fine.
I didn't see the video, but I heard about those pictures that you had taken.
Oh, wait.
We took some young men up into the mountains of Montana last weekend, and it was just epic. Place called Mystic Lake, and we camped at like 8,000 feet, and we had picture perfect weather. One of the highlights for me actually was on Saturday. We went for a day hike. We hiked about 5 miles in, but then we went for a day hike from there the next day up to this other lake, Huckleberry Lake. Beautiful hike up there, and we celebrated Mass right next to the lake. We had a priest that come with us. And we've got trout surfacing.
That is awesome.
I could see the trout hitting at the top of the water while we've got the Eucharistic prayer going on. And then actually after Mass, we were able to catch the trout, and then we actually cooked them over a charcoal fire right there, and then proclaimed John 21, which is that scripture passage where Jesus says, "Come and have breakfast," and he's got fish over the charcoal fire.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So who was all on the camping trip?
So a bunch of young men from the area, mostly in their 20s, and a couple of mentors. So we had two guys that each of the older guys were mentoring, kind of having some one-on-one conversations with throughout the weekend, and it was awesome.
So, Brian, I'm going to stack some questions on here.
Yeah.
One, theology of the body. I'd love to just unpack that for the listeners that may have heard of it on the surface. Maybe just if we can unpack that in detail. And then two, if, I want to talk about these young men. I've had a couple young men now reach out and, ask about basically something similar to what you just did in Montana, where they want to go through, be tested. They want to have this adversity that they think they're going to find maybe, or didn't find in the military, or, and there's also young men that are paying thousands of dollars for these secular programs to go through 4 days of pain or adversity to come out the other side, to have brotherhood, to have, say, hey, I faced this adversity of some sense. And I'm curious if that plays into the echo too. There's these guys that are maybe chasing adversity, not knowing, one, adversity comes, you don't have to chase it. And then two, they want to test themselves. And I don't know if there's that correlation there between the theology of the body, adversity, understanding that men are built for sacrifice, and unpacking that too, because I think there's a lie that gets played in, like, well, what does that mean? I'm just supposed to be a doormat. It's like, no, this idea of serving others. I'd love to just really dive into theology of the body as a framework for answering these questions, these deeper questions that young men specifically are having, like, who am I? And why do I exist? And how am I supposed to live out my vocation? What is my vocation? And why is there this emptiness? If we can just maybe speak to that a little bit. And I realize I just stacked a bunch there, but I'll pass you the baton.
Well, so for people who aren't familiar, right, the term theology of the body is not a familiar term. It's kind of a little bit of a clunky phrase. Theology is a study of God as revealed through the body, that actually the body has things to teach us if we pay attention as to what it means. Not only like it, not just looking at the physiology of the specific body parts and things like that. John Paul actually never talks about that, but he talks about the meaning of the body. And that not only does it matter in a general sense, but that there is a specific meaning that the male and female body have, and specifically in light of one another, that they speak to the fact that we're made to be a gift, that we are called to lay our life down for the other. And there's so many things that come into that nexus point with our faith and with the adversity that you just talked about, and sacrifice, and all these things of, your life doesn't make sense on your own. And it doesn't make sense when you just sit on a couch all day and play video games, or you are called to come out of yourself. And actually our sexual desire is a part of all that it's actually something that God gave us to call us out of our solitude and into a relationship with another, not simply for the sake of a sexual embrace, but actually for the sake of the total giving of self. And so it's really deep waters. There's a lot to meditate upon there. There's a lot of terms and a lot of things that are really interesting, thousands of nuggets that actually you don't just get through going to a talk or even just going to a retreat about the theology of the body, but you actually start to unpack these things through what John Paul would call like a praxis, a lived experience through it throughout your life. And I think young men are tired of simply having a bunch of polarizing sort of things said about them. And they are looking for an opportunity to go ahead and just step in and go ahead and wrestle with some of the important questions, and to do so in a way that actually goes deep. I know that when I was in college, I don't know about you guys, but like I was really good at going fast, but not good at going deep. I was very busy and I was doing a lot of different things. But nobody had really taught me how to settle in and how to consider the deeper sort of questions and to go into the interiority of a man, of myself. And so there's some really deep stuff in that set of teachings. So we did the exterior sort of beautiful, rugged, like put the pack on and go high up the mountain and it's a difficult journey. And then have some solitude and some silence and some really deep discussion, and you've got a young man here who's sitting on the edge of one of the most beautiful spots in creation, crying his eyes out because he's actually getting to the depth of what he was made for and starting to tap into that, and I've always thought that going out into nature, actually, this is not all about nature, by the way, but now that we're on it, like there is something powerful about being able to be out in creation, what I would call the cathedral of creation. To recognize God's beauty and his call to us and to consider those deeper things there. So for many years, actually, our ministry has done a lot of co-ed things because we can learn so much from each other.
Yes.
And more recently, we've started to be able to segment off a little bit more and to have some more just stuff for young men or just stuff for young women to be able to reflect on those things and go deeper.
That's awesome. A couple more questions here, guys, but love and responsibility, and then humanae vitae. Does that tie into your mission? I've heard it said humanae vitae, and I haven't read it. I need to. They say it's a gateway drug for Catholicism. And then
are we speaking English here? I'm sorry. Catholic convert corner over here. What words are you saying?
I don't speak Spanish either, but apparently.
So the Latin is it's Humanae Vitae, written by Pope Saint Paul VI. And it's on the dignity of life, on the dignity of human life.
Thank you for that.
And so that's basically the outline, the skeleton outline that then John Paul II will then take and flesh out in the theology of the body. Pretty much, if you look at the outline of Humanae Vitae, it actually, if you look at that and then look at the outline of John Paul II's theology of the body, he's following the same, in a sense, the same outline, but he's really unpacking and going deeper. Scripture references left and right.
And like you were saying earlier, he delivered this message over the course of 5 years during his general audience on Wednesdays, right? Mm-hmm. To me, that's really cool.
Yeah.
This wasn't just like one body of work. It was delivered over a really long period of time.
And being like one of his first works that he went to accomplish was to address this, give this address, to give this teaching.
Started September 5th, 1979. And went until November 1984, and during that time, actually, there were plenty of people who had no idea what he was talking about, because at that point they weren't all in a collection. So nobody had heard it all together except for the seminarians that were studying in Rome and were like going to all the audiences. And they did ask him, like, why are you giving this right now? And he said, I'm not giving this for this generation. I'm giving it for the next generation.
Wow.
And
amazing.
And you actually think about, right, Jason, like the title of the work is not Theology of the Body. That's the subtitle. The title of the work is Man and Woman, He Created Them.
Wow.
And you think about, like, right now, what's more controversial in the world than that title?
Right.
Like, this is the generation that needs it more than anybody else does.
Yes,
like, going back to the fundamentals of what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman?
Yeah, and we think we're so progressive in today's society, and we can't even define the most basic foundational terms from the beginning of Genesis.
Yeah. And so Love and Responsibility actually is a precursor,
That's
I
right.
would call it, to like a prequel to the Theology of the Body. It came out of 2 years of lectures that John Paul, well, at that point he was Karol Wojtyła at the University of Lublin in Poland at the end of the 1950s. And it came out into a book around 1960. And working with all these young people, these young adults, on the nature of attraction and the nature of love and the sexual urge and what is chastity and how do we actually wrap our minds in a practical way about this. Love and Responsibility is a supremely practical work, even though it's more philosophical, and I would say even maybe a bit more challenging for some people. It's more practical than the Theology of the Body is.
That's right.
Theology of the Body is a bit more esoteric and has a lot of beautiful, rich stuff, but it's not quite as practical and on the nose as Love and Responsibility is. But they're counterparts. One kind of sets up the other, and there's some deep waters to swim in there and to learn about how to reverence the gift of yourself and reverence the gift of the other, and know how to live out the call to be an authentic man.
You know, so you mentioned deep waters here, and already I feel like we're getting close to neck deep here. Is there kind of some baby pools that we can step into? I mean, I just learned like who John Paul II was like 4 or 5 years ago.
Did you bring the floaties before we started talking about this, Brian? Come on.
Right. No, but seriously, like, so what, I don't know, is there kind of some summaries of this, or maybe you recommend going to a talk, or just to kind of take this one bite at a time?
Yeah. So, I mean, it is hard. I'll just, first of all, just say, like, it's not an easy thing to go ahead and dig into something that's 135 addresses. You know, he had 129 that he gave and 6 that he never gave in person. They only found them after he had died. And those were specifically on reflections on the Book of Tobit and on the Song of Songs that were kind of a more sensitive nature. And he said he didn't want to give these talks in St. Peter's Square with kids running around and, you know, hearing words or things that were a little bit maybe above their age level of what was appropriate for them. And so 135 talks on anything is hard to distill, right? And then you take an intellectual giant and some really deep, beautiful things, and it's hard. So it is important to kind of, I think grabbing a nugget and being able to like chew on that for a while is healthy. So one of the things I was thinking about on the way here was like, and I actually haven't talked about it this way before, but it came to me. So St. Ignatius of Loyola talks about in his first, the first line before he wrote his 14 rules for discernment, he talks about being aware, understanding, and then taking action, and about how important that is to cultivate a spiritual awareness so that I can understand what's coming from God and what's not coming from God. And once I understand what's from him, then my action is to hold on to that. And if there's something coming from the enemy, then my action is to reject that. Right. And I was thinking on the way here about how the body, right, is a super, obviously, elemental thing that we all have in common, but it's so familiar to us that we take it for granted, and we start to simply live in the exterior world of appearances, and we stop going deeper into the understanding of its meaning and about who we are on the inside. So a lot of the words that you'll hear in the Theology of the Body are consciousness, awareness, freedom, intentionality. There's a lot about the inner world that John Paul invites us to look at our own subjectivity, which means like your unique experience apart from mine, right? And to recognize that to cultivate a proper understanding of the gift of the body and the gift of the revelation that the body brings, which I would say there's two main things that he teaches us that the body reveals. It reveals the person and it reveals God. And those if you just stop right there, and we did the whole rest of the show on the fact that the body reveals God and the body reveals a person, and coming back to that fundamental sort of awareness and consciousness of that changes the game as to how you relate as a son, as a brother, as a husband, as a father, as a grandfather. So I think starting there is like really important. Like, what does the body reveal? What does it mean? And what impact does that make on my choices? You know?
And speaking about choices, specifically like chastity within a lot of listeners, you know, they're married with kids or grandfathers or young men. Like, can you talk to us about chastity and the importance there and what the Lord is revealing in the theology of the body and why chastity makes sense, especially opposed to the narrative of the modern world, which is the opposite? I mean, you even have magazines that say, hey, you're going to be healthier if you masturbate frequently. If you're on a road trip for business and you're having a hard time sleeping because of time zone, you need to masturbate. You need, like, where I mean, there's huge misses here in terms of what the media says is healthy versus what we know when the church and formation is completely opposite.
Yeah. So in Love and Responsibility, John Paul actually said that the word chastity needs to be rehabilitated because it's, I don't know, you could look like, is it because it's on its deathbed or is it because it's actually like just been radically misunderstood? And one of the big misunderstandings, it's been a big, long no. It's been about what I'm supposed to say no to. And John Paul's vision and the church's vision is actually, it's a big yes to love and its authentic demands. Like, what does it cost? Like, love is supposed to cost us something. Otherwise it's worth nothing. Right. And so love in and through my own body in the way that I'm called to lay down my life for my wife, it needs to cost me something. And so when it's difficult to go ahead and reverence her and to say yes, to just serve her and to see her as her body as a revelation of the gift of God and the gift of her person and not as an object, that's a much higher standard than just don't do X,
and
Y, or
it's so
Z.
important because John Paul II said that only the chaste man and only the chaste woman is capable of true love. So if Satan has his game plan to destroy us, then he's going to strike us down in this world of chastity. He's going to try to make this thing put it on the deathbed, because then he doesn't want us to authentically love, because then by doing so, then we are radiating into the world the authentic expression in our bodies of who God is and love.
Yeah, maybe a little analogy here. So there was years ago at my parish, my church parish, there was a family that had a fireplace, and you've got little 7 or 8 year old boy and 3 or 4 year old little brother, and they're both throwing pieces of paper into the fire. Older brother leaves the room. Little brother ends up holding a piece of paper in his hand that he realizes is on fire. And when he does, he knows that's a bad thing, so he stuffed it underneath the couch. And then the whole house burned to the ground. And by God's grace, everybody got out in this particular story. But John Paul II says that if chastity is lived as repression, that it can lead to sexual explosions. And I think a lot of people think that chastity is repression, that you're just supposed to stuff your desires down. You just put them underneath the couch. You just don't worry about it. And that's how you deal with these things. I've met a lot of older men even who are still in that space of thinking that that's the way to be holy, is just stuff your desires away and just don't think about the pink elephant that's over there. And it's not natural. It's not honest. It's not healthy. And so what is the problem? Is the problem in the fire in that fireplace? No, it's that the kids were not taught about the value and the purpose of the fire and how to cultivate it properly. And that's true about our sexuality. Is like, we have to, as men, intentionally help our especially our young men, our daughters as well, to cultivate a right understanding of the gift of their sexuality, to not be afraid of it and not to stuff everything underneath the couch, but to learn how to properly reverence it, learn about what its meaning is and why marriage and the gift of two people coming together in life and love is the way that God intends us to fully express the gift of self with the conjugal embrace. So chastity is not the problem. It's the wrong understanding of chastity that's a problem in our day and age. And certainly it's a scapegoat, easy way out to go ahead and just say, well, just relieve yourself whenever you have a challenge. And that's the way to go.
Yeah. And it's not embracing the sacrifice that we're called to be able to be that gift, to be able to authentically embrace truth, love. It's such a cross, because we're living in such a time right now that, I was making that comment about the covenant eyes at the beginning of the podcast. It was just like, we are under attack. And I had a friend of mine who, he knew someone who came across from a third world country to study in the United States. And it wasn't until he moved to the United States that he started having a problem with pornography and masturbation. And in his home country, this wasn't in the culture, like this wasn't in the movies or the magazines or the billboards or the things that he was exposed to, but he got here and it's bombarded. So I think that we need to realize that a lot of our struggles, we are in an environment that we haven't guarded our eyes, guarded our senses. We've let our guard down, and so then now the enemy has room for attack.
And specifically, then I think next level is that John Paul would say, not only do you need to guard your eyes, but you need to understand what's going on in the interior. Like he actually talks in the Theology of the Body about how we're called to become like a watchman over a hidden spring. Like paying attention to the very small, minute, like bubbling of a desire, and where is it coming from, and when does it arise, and what do I do with that? Right.
Wow.
And so many times we just feel like we're just caught off guard because, like I said,
right.
we were going fast and we weren't going deep.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden I've got all these desires, and a person can even end up taking that out on your wife, unintentionally maybe.
Yeah.
And that's like not the mature understanding of how to become that really interior man, a man who is master over his own impulses, who understands where they're coming from, and who understands how to be able to control himself and learn, and how to lay his life down for the other. And, you're talking about pornography, and somebody, I think it was a bishop somewhere in the US, who distilled John Paul's work at one point in this little phrase. I don't know which bishop it was. And he said, the problem with pornography is not that it reveals too much of the person,
too little,
but far too little. And I think that that's a really important thing to recognize, not just for pornography, but think about how many times in life we look at the person for what we can get from them and not for who they really are. And pick your spot in life, but that's a spot to work as far as, okay, the body is a revelation of God and of the person. Well, if your body is revealing God, then I have to learn how to see you as a tabernacle. I have to learn how to be able to reverence you. And that takes time, because you don't always appear to me like a tabernacle. And sometimes I'm all caught up in a certain way of being that's maybe been cultivated over years.
Right. And this goes to the point, like John Paul II, this isn't about like a bunch of rules, like don't do this, don't do that. The ethics, this is the change of the heart. Like the Lord is this divine heart surgeon who wants to come in and help us to become this man of God, this one who can see the other for who they are and to be the man that we're called to be. And it requires us to go into this deep dive, into these reflections, to allow the heart, the ethos of the heart, to be able to line up with the truth. So it's like this renewing of the heart through the renewing of the mind. We need to sit with this truth, these truths, Drew, to your question about where can we go? Like, Brian, what would you recommend? Some good books, videos, things like that. I know we have more time, but just in case we don't get to it, like, where are some things specifically that you would recommend to kind of help on that intro 101 level, and then also to advance that? And also, I want to kind of come back, if it's okay, to bring back to the echo, like, what does that retreat look like? What's the timeline on it? What do you do, and who's it for?
Yeah, so a couple of books, and guys who've been doing a lot of teaching over the years of theology of the body and making it accessible, because it is a dense teaching. Christopher West has Theology of the Body for Beginners. That's not a super hard book to read. That's a great one. Jason Everett's got Theology of the Body in 1 hour. Those are both great introductions. I think the TOB in 1 hour will probably take you a little more than an hour, but it's it's a good title, and it is short. And those are good introductions. And there are some others out there for sure as well. And I think, yeah, getting into that, to something that's short like that will whet your appetite to want to go deeper, because this is, again, not something you just read it and then you just get it, but this is a lifelong sort of process of integration, and starting to be able to figure out what are some of those nuggets for you to work on is I think where the gold is at. Not about getting to the end of the book, you know, but it's like being able to, you might be in chapter 1 and realize I got plenty right now. This is where I need to start working on, you know.
As we're talking through this too, Brian, I think there's a couple of things that you're hitting on. One, in a kind of roundabout way, you're hitting on the importance of contemplative prayer. I think we're hitting on chastity within marriage too. I think a lot of people listening, or I know I was thinking like, oh, well, I might be struggling with impurity, but when I get married, it'll be solved. We had a guest on, Jimmy Sager, last season. He's like, he related this idea of a deathbed conversion. He's like, it's not reality. He's like, if you have the flu, you're not thinking about anything other than how bad you feel. You're not going to have a deathbed conversion. You know, and I think the same thing, if you're not working on chastity before marriage and you just assume it's going to be taken care of in marriage, you're kidding yourself. And then the other thing within marriage, this idea of what does chastity look like there? And I think maybe we could also talk about, if you're open to it, is this idea of the church teaching on contraception.
Yeah. So there's a lot there that I would just say, actually, the first part of it is being able to approach your wife with reverence. That's a short sentence that actually takes so many different things into account. And if the standard and the measure of that is not what you think, but it's what she thinks. You know, it's like, well, what is she, how does she feel about what you are doing or not doing, and how you're doing it? And so G.K. Chesterton once said, the perennial psychological and spiritual task of man is to look at things familiar until they become unfamiliar again. And what that means is, like, it's our forever call to look at the things that I am so comfortable with that I might take for granted, and say, like, Lord, help me to see it with completely fresh eyes. Yes. And the first thing I thought of when I heard that quote was my wife, Lisa. And, like, what a tragedy it would be for her to walk in the room and me to see somebody coming around and be like, oh, it's just Lisa. Like, that's a tragedy.
Yeah.
Actually, I need her to walk in the room and have me be like, wow, I want to be mystified anew. I want to actually come deeper into the respect and an understanding and a reverence before the mystery of who you are, not less so because I've been around you a lot. This is my wife. This is my sacrament. This is the one that God wants to use to reveal himself to me and to call me closer to himself. And a lot of times we get really, really comfortable with our wives, and then I don't have to work quite as hard because, you know, I mean, she knows I love her, and, you know, so. But go back to the beginning when you were, like, ready to, like, climb a mountain to pursue this woman. It's like, well, that actually should not decrease. That should increase with a healthy sort of love and a healthy relationship. And so that reverence, I would say, is really important. And the latter part of the theology of the body, John Paul talks about that, of being able to live this out in marriage takes the virtue of piety, pietas in Latin, like, and it's about reverence, of being able to see this wonderful sacred gift of this person before me. In all of my responses to her, in the 17th address, this is backing up earlier for a minute here. He actually, this is a surprise to me, because as men, we're initiators and we're called to lead. But he actually talks about the fact that our first gift to a woman is our acceptance of her. The way that we accept the gift of this woman from God's hand is actually, so it's actually an act of receptivity, which is the way that we show a mirror to her of her worth. Is that I actually, when I am amazed by you in a proper sense, when I am in awe of you and the beauty and the mystery of who you are, I properly tell you who you are, because that is true about you. And I'm properly ordering myself as to how I'm going to treat you as that great gift. And these are things that set us up to be able to live chastity in marriage, which means I'm not mastered by my passions, but I master my passions. And we live that out in and through, you know, following the teachings of the church. And that's, yes, on the side of the ethical lines, but also in the way, in the ethos, in the way that I'm treating her throughout the entirety of our marriage, throughout the entirety of the month. And so, yeah, we're going to practice natural family planning, right? Which is saying yes to the gift of fertility and treating it like a gift rather than a curse or a threat or a problem or something we have to say no to. So we're not going to engage in contraception, because that very word means against conception and is saying, no, I know better than what you know, God. Like, I'm not going to say yes to this. Whereas inherent in the sexual act, we don't get to assign what it means. It's actually a gift that God gave to us. And when if I say yes to that, then I want to receive it the way that he intended it, which is to be open to the gift of life. And so I don't think we probably have time or it's a space to like get into all the details of what natural family planning is, but there are beautiful modern methods that actually reverence science and actually use at a very high level precision with the body and the nature of hormonal movement and mucus and all these kinds of things to actually help a man and woman be able to prudently and generously be able to plan their family. And that's not to kill spontaneity. It's not to kill the gift of coming together in the sexual embrace, but it's actually to order it so that it's actually meant to be what God meant it to be from the beginning.
This self-mastery is so important, because if we keep talking about this being a man and sacrifice and being a living sacrifice, as the quote from Romans, this gift of self, if we don't have self-control, if we're not in control of ourselves, then we cannot give ourselves authentically to others. So if we're not in control of ourselves, then we're being controlled by our passions. Our yes means nothing, and we're just following wherever our passions lead us, which is not, and it's not, it doesn't lead us to happiness.
And I would say that is one of the fundamental things, Drew, that you asked about, is like, what are some of the fundamentals we could kind of hold on to here? And it's like, so John Paul would teach us like, well, if you can't possess yourself, then you can't give yourself away, right? You have to be able to possess yourself. Well, how can you possess yourself if you don't know who you are? I remember years ago, this quirky comedy that I saw called Juno. Have you guys ever seen that movie, Juno?
Oh, yeah.
So Juno, this girl, she's like 16 or whatever, and she gets pregnant out of wedlock. She's got this quirky sense of humor. She's, now she's sexually active with her boyfriend and everything. She finds out she's pregnant. She's like got to tell her parents about this. She's going to tell her dad, and she's all nervous, and she lets him know, and he nicknamed her Junebug. So she has this moment. She lets him know, and then he says like, Junebug, I thought you were the kind of girl that knew when to say when. And she kind of just pauses for a minute and she looks down, and then she's like, well, I guess I don't know what kind of girl I am, Dad. And I thought, okay, this is a beautiful moment to recognize, like, okay, if I don't know who I am, then I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't have a way because I don't know who I am. I'm just going in any particular direction. So the first half of the theology of the body actually anchors us in that self-possession because of helping us to understand the truth of our identity and of who I am as a son of God. Now, he's not in every other paragraph talking about being a son of God, but he actually is laying out the fullness of our story and the truth of our story and the truth of God's love for us and understanding his plan from the very beginning. And when I start to really own that as my own story, and then I know that God has always been with me, and he's always had a plan, and it's always been good, and God is trustworthy, and I can follow him, and he's giving me everything I need, then I'm no longer living as an orphan. And I feel like you guys actually mentioned something like that a number of podcasts ago when you were talking about sonship, right? Like the difference between living like as an orphan, as if your dad's not there, nobody has your back, versus like living as a son of the king. And I would say it's a roundabout way of getting there in the theology of the body, but there is this anchoring in the truth of like your identity through your story. But you guys, but I used to think that like Genesis was like naked people and a talking snake, and they ruined my life. Like I thought that was the whole story, and come to see through this lens, like, no, there is a richness of an inheritance here of the goodness of who you are and who God made you to be, and the gift of your masculinity, the gift of your femininity, and the how to live that out. That actually anchors you so that you do know what you're called to and why you're called to it and how to pursue that,
All right. So I know we're ending the show here in the next few minutes. A lot of our listeners are kind of in the early 40s, late 30s. We've got some kids in high school, headed to high school. What advice would you give to fathers? This is a really important subject. I mean, how do we kind of we're talking about identity. How do we start to kind of broach this with our kids, or point them in the right direction, and maybe attend an Echo community retreat?
Yeah, we certainly would love to have people come on retreats. We've got one coming up in Dallas next month. We just had one this past weekend locally here in Covington, but October 13th to the 15th in Dallas, echoretreats.com. You can find out about that. There is a married couples retreat coming up in November, but that's been sold out for a while. So look for the next one, whenever
Do
that's
more
going to be.
of those. You should do more of those. That sounds good.
I think that, sometimes as men, I think we kind of want to believe that our kids kind of already get certain things, or we don't want to talk about the awkward subjects. And I think that love pushes past the awkward moments. Mm-hmm. And as fathers, we have to be willing to like push past the awkward moments to have some of those more challenging conversations, and even to ask the questions, like the Socratic method with our kids of like, well, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
Right. And let them start. Let them see what they say. And they're like, well, I'm a baseball player. And like, well, that's great. I'm glad God gave you gifts. And like, you are a good baseball player. But what if you got hurt and you could never play baseball again? Is your identity gone? And see what they say. And then when you start to help them to understand, like, no, God is your father, and he made you to be who you are. And he gave me a participation and like to get a chance to be your dad. And I love being your dad. And I want to, love you. And I want to get to even be a better dad, for you, so that you can always stay secure, in that truth, whether you fail a test, whether you hit the home run, or if you break your leg and you can't ever, play baseball again. Like, I think these things help us to get into the depth of identity. And then the depth of sexuality is starting to have, paying attention to what is going on in their lives at the proper ages, so that we can try to be first in that conversation. We don't want to be triaging, having conversations when kids are 14 years old because we just waited too long. And now we're trying to play catch up and try to correct this vision that they're going to find out from someone. They're going to ask someone about these things. And a lot of times they're going to ask Google and end up in pornography and things like that, which is giving them a distorted vision of the truth of sexuality. So on the side of fatherhood, I think having those earlier conversations and setting it aside important time for it, that's not just the normal time. I know for me with my sons, I actually did take them outdoors, on a camping trip and stuff like that, to try to set apart this time where we're not doing anything else. We're just wasting time hanging out together, and having those space for those deeper conversations to happen, and we don't have to go anywhere, and there's more freedom to kind of talk at that deeper level. I think that's a great task that, there's only one man that God called to be father of your 5 kids, Drew. Mm-hmm. And so everyone else on the planet might have something good to say to your kids, but nobody actually has. I don't have to say what only you can say. And I think we need to empower men to recognize that that's just your place of confidence. Is God gave you the office of fatherhood. It's not it's not an achievement. It's actually an entrustment, that God has entrusted you as the father of your particular kids, and nobody else on planet Earth has that entrustment other than you. So let's trust the Holy Spirit that when it's time for you to have a conversation with those kids, he's going to give you the words to speak, Preach.
I would love, Drew, if maybe instead of taxing takeaway, we do questions for Brian.
Yeah, let's do it. That was one of my questions. Yeah,
I'll go.
Yeah, go for Clint.
Kind of going back to chastity within marriage and natural family planning. By the praise be to God, my wife and I have been doing NFP for many years now, and the fruits of that is just, I can't even describe it. And how well it has benefited our marriage, our union together. If you're to try to tug on the heartstrings of men that are kind of on the fence, if you could just from your personal opinion talk about, why is it worth considering doing that? What are the benefits of getting to that level of chastity within your marriage and having that relationship with your wife? I mean, I think where we are, married couples either don't understand fully what chastity in marriage is, or maybe just don't want to agree to do it, to make that sacrifice. So just would like your opinion on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are like St. Augustine, right? Who said, "Oh Lord, give me continence, but not yet." Like, I want to grow in this, but not right now, because it is hard. And I think it is important to say, like, natural family planning is not easy. Let's be honest about that, to say it's not easy. But like you talked about, what man just wants the easy route? If he's a good man, like, he doesn't just want the easy route. He wants to be able to know he's actually being a really good man, and he's doing what he's called to do, and he's loving his wife the very best way that he can. And so I think the best way is to have faithful witnesses of it, to share, even like you just now did. Like, you gave 3 minutes of like, okay, this has actually brought my wife and I closer together. What better testament than that? Mm-hmm. Like, well, are you willing to be able to take up a little bit of a cross here to take you more deeply into really loving your wife, and to have a conscience that knows, like, Lord, I'm reverencing her and the gift of our sexuality the way that you actually invited us to. Now that can be a little more romantic, right, than it is practical sometimes. And the practical side, I would say, is learning to be able to, if you can't say no to something, then what is your yes worth? And I think we even need to ask ourselves that inside of marriage when it comes to the gift of sexuality and the gift of our embrace. It's like, well, can you actually really practice self-control and say, no, I'm going to love you in other ways? There's a joke, it's not really, it was a true story, but like a friend who had another friend who had a baby, and they're in the hospital, and the doctor says right afterwards, this woman has a baby, to the husband, like, you're all going to have to abstain, and he goes, okay. And he says, for 30 days. And he goes, in a row? He goes, yeah, 30 days in a row. And there's a little 70-year-old Catholic nun who's in the room, right. And she turns and he goes, you'll be okay. Right? And it's like, we have this idea that actually having self-control and having self-denial and loving each other in other ways is going to kill us somehow. And it's just not true. And actually, as you found, and I've found in my own life, it actually makes our love stronger, to learn that we can learn to love in other ways. And we can start to listen to our wives and to go deeper. And actually it creates a greater desire that's in a different sort of way, because now we're loving the whole person. We're being challenged to make sure there's not a space where we're just slipping into a routine or slipping into like just following a desire, rather than really letting that whole thing be purified. I don't know if that answers the question well enough.
That's great.
Yeah.
So before passing to Jason here, question for you. So a good friend of mine and mentor, Jake Kim, he's known for struggling with pornography and overcoming it. And he gives a lot of men hope, saying like, hey, this is possible. But to get to that crux and that point in his life where he's like, I have to put the old man to death, it was his wife that basically gave an ultimatum, like, look, Jake, you either get a handle on this, or me and the kids are out of here. I think a lot of guys deal with pornography in secret. I think his wife knew. He was open with her. He's like, hey, I'm struggling with this. And she wasn't like, it's okay. She just basically said, well, check, here's the ultimatum. And he said, look, I felt like there was times where, I was going to explode, but it is doable. A lot of men don't, hear that pornography, you can overcome it. I don't think men hear that. I think too, a lot of guys, we've gotten to the point where a lot of guys don't even know pornography and masturbation's a mortal sin. They just think, oh yeah. And you even have clergy that say, hey, look, this isn't a mortal sin. Guys struggle with this. This is natural. This happens. And so they've almost kind of just given into the culture and given ground there. For the listeners, Brian, what is the benefit, like Jake's point, what is the benefit of going through that crucible to get to the other end? What's the encouragement? I think a lot of guys will suffer, like, Viktor Frankl says, they'll endure any, how, or based on a why, or so like, what is the desire? What's at the end of this for these men to go through this fire of purification, to say, yeah, this is worth it. I want to put this sin to death with the help and grace of the sacraments and in cooperation with the Lord, for my bride, for my children, for the church, and for the salvation of my soul. What would you tell these listeners?
Yeah. I hope you guys do another podcast on specifically on pornography, like, because I think that's just, it needs to have its due time. But I would say that our hearts are made for the yes, and we long for the greatness, and to live out a great love. We don't long to just say no to pornography. That's not like the greatest desire in my heart. The greater desire is to go ahead and say yes to the noble love. And so I think to remember that you're saying yes to love, and that the same way that when I went to the altar, like I said, I do to one. It wasn't that I said I don't to the 3.5 billion other women in the world. Like, that's not ordering my life. It's the yes that orders my life to Lisa. And if it's from that yes that I'm able to say all the other no's that I have. If I start to forget about Lisa and I start to not look at her anymore, then all those other options are going to start to look more and more attractive. So I think asking the Lord to even inflame your desire for your wife, and to see, well, first for himself and to know that he is the greatest love, but then secondly, to really see her as a person and the beautiful mystery that she is, and to recognize that anytime that we go to pornography, we're actually taking a dagger to her heart. And if all the lights were on, and if everybody saw, and if she saw exactly what you're doing, like we can actually, it can be a fire in our hearts. Like, okay, no, I can say yes to her in this moment. I can say yes to Christ in this moment. I also want to give a shout out of a resource that we created. Adam Fuselier is my managing director at Echo Community, and he wrote a beautiful prayer called the Litany of Chastity. And we've actually distributed over 140,000 of these now. And it's an incredible short prayer that's fold up in your wallet kind of situation that really helps any of us that are struggling with chastity, whether it's pornography, masturbation, internal fantasies, whatever it might be, to go ahead and actually turn everything over to the Lord in a proper way, in a prayerful way. That's not just like pull your stuff up by your bootstraps and do better. But like, no, Lord, like, I'm weak, but you're strong, and I want to ask for your strength in this place because I'm very weak, and I want to say yes to you and to love. So being able to order that in a repetitive way, and to have accountability for it, and to be able to, Covenant Eyes, who's the sponsor of this program, actually is not simply about the software. It's about actually establishing an accountability with a brother that's actually going to help call you on what's true. And I think if you try to do it in the dark, you're just boxing with one arm, instead of actually opening yourself up to the light. And thank God for Jake. Like his wife actually helped push him to that space. I think a lot of us, we actually need another man to do that, so that we're able to admit, our faults and before them, and then have them help us to rise above, to live out the great love. Jesus said, man has no greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And our wives should be our best friend that we're laying our life down for, including putting away pornography.
Love what you said, Brian, and especially the fact highlighting the litany of chastity, the prayer, because chastity first is a gift.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes like we forget the order of things, that we receive the gift, and we also need to cultivate the gift. We need to receive the gift, and we need to be a fertile resting place for that gift to remain. But it's a gift that we need to pray for constantly, to be fervent in our prayers. Even if you've mastered the gift of chastity, there's going to be constant attacks that will hit us at times. And so to be on guard and to understand the importance of chastity, again, only the chaste man and the chaste woman is capable of true love.
And that's a free resource, by the way. So if y'all do put it in the show notes,
we'll put that. We'll put the books that you referenced, also the link to the website for the Echo Community. Again, I want to ask, again, as we're wrapping things up, I want to ask just some insights on masculinity, kind of like with the theology of the body kind of in mind, but also too, did you get a chance to kind of talk about the Echo retreat itself? Like, who's it for and how long is it? Maybe start there, and then if you can answer the former.
Yeah, so the Echo retreats are in different formats. Like the one we had this past weekend was just for young adults, and it was a Friday through Sunday. It was like a mini experience of just going deep into the teaching, but specifically through lots of ways of integration. So there was a river hike, there was, there was volleyball, there was music, there was art, there was confession, daily mass, conversation, discussions, great talks, a lot of different ways to get a chance to experience the truth of who we are and to start to practice that truth in a community at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to learn something at a conference and then try to go put it into practice. It's another thing to learn it with some other people and start practicing it right now.
Yeah, right.
And then grow from that taste of beauty and goodness and say, no, I want this in my daily life. And I'm going to start doing more of that. So yeah, echoretreats.com. You can find all of them. And so sometimes they're a weekend. The ones in the summer, actually,
Yes.
You come as a young adult on the weekend, receive that experience. And then on Monday, the teenagers arrive and the young adults turn around, and the next 4 days they become the mentors and they give away what they just received. And so, it's a 2-in-1 sort of retreat there, and a really incredible opportunity to have hearts opened and hearts changed. And then we start segmenting it towards different audiences. We have Echo for engaged couples. We actually haven't released that yet, but it should be this coming spring in April, in spring 2024. We'll have one for engaged couples, every now and then for married couples as well. And so
I think you should call it Echo for old adults.
Echo for old adults. Yeah, right.
So then, and then the question about masculinity, again, in light of the theology of the body, kind of closing thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, John Paul helps us to understand that masculinity does not make sense without femininity. He even talks about the fact that, like, when Adam went to sleep, when God put Adam to sleep, that he woke up male and female, which means before there is an other there, masculinity doesn't make sense. I'm not really male, right? And Adam, when he wakes up with Eve, now he can see his way to make a gift of himself, because before he couldn't. So basically, in isolation, I can't fully live out the gift of my masculinity. I inherently am called to make a gift of myself. Why? Because I'm created in the image and likeness of God, and God is constantly giving of himself. He exists as a total gift of self between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This
asymmetrical, fruitful reciprocity.
There it goes. And
Wow.
And the reciprocity of the gift is something that John Paul II says, actually, the man has to ensure that. He's the one that actually has to, like, sorry if we're going like, but like that.
No, I love it.
Reciprocity, meaning back and forth, that I have to give. And actually, he says that the giving becomes a receiving and the receiving becomes a giving. And so learning how to do that with our wives and with the women in our lives, actually, I would say, also orders us to be able to do that with other men properly, because it's only like that helps us to become more sensitive to the truth of the person. And so if you're just hanging out with your guys and stuff like that, we might kind of just, keep beating on each other. And like, no, I'm called to actually have a sensitive heart to my brother also. I am called to strengthen him. I'm called to, like, challenge him, but I'm also called to be sensitive to his needs. And like, can I share a quick story?
Please. We got time. Go ahead.
So recently I actually went to a meeting in New Orleans, and I came up, it's like in the evening, and I came up and I was one of the first people on site at a crash scene. And there was a motorcycle, a young man who had come and hit directly into another car, and his body's just broken. Right. And there's two other guys there at this point. Oh, actually a woman and a man, and nobody's yet near this young man who's broken on the ground. Nobody's touching him. Like, there's other things that need to be done, calling 911 and stuff like that, but nobody's attending to this broken human being on the ground. And so I end up parking my car and, like, running back into this place. And the call was like to put my hand on I couldn't flip him over because we didn't know what would, if he'd had spinal injuries or whatnot, but like to put my hand and to touch him and to, like, pray the Hail Mary and to, like, be with him there as he's in his possible last moments of life, like, touching the suffering of another human person. And I think that for too long, sometimes we've bought the lie in the Western world of masculinity is to go ahead and, just destroy all the bad stuff. And that's actually partly right. I'm called to, like, stand up for all that. But you know what? I'm called to, like, protect all the good things. I'm not just called to destroy evil. That's actually, again, going to the no, but it's like, live from the yes of, like, what is true and good and noble and holy and sacred, and, like, put your strength at risk for that, right? For your child, for this for the woman, your sister, your grandmother, the lady next door, or the broken person in front of you on the ground. And I'm still processing that experience, but it was like there was my heart was beating. In some sense, I did feel like there was a gift of grace of like my heart beating in the right moment there, you know, that like Pope Francis talks about this accompaniment, like leads us into a space of touching the suffering of others. And he says that when we do that, that actually our lives become wonderfully complicated. And I think that we have to be willing to go into that complication by having a heart that's sensitive enough, like Christ, to move into those spaces with the gift that he's given us to make a gift of ourselves.
But it becomes real and becomes ordered too, to your point, because too oftentimes, if you ask individuals, what's going on, what's wrong with the world, they say, well, we live in this godless society. And you hear those comments a lot. But what you don't hear is people focused on God and a relationship with God. You feel there's this vague, godless society. It's like, but God, what is your relationship with God? And then, to your point, with the analogy of like when you were talking about Lisa, or like when I'm talking about Lauren, my wife, now I'm ordered. It's focused. Now I can actually engage. And to your point, like, okay, here is a human. It's like, oh, they're suffering, but I can now impact and relieve the best you can this suffering. And it becomes focused, perhaps complicated, but you can enter in because now you see and your mission.
And I've heard you guys talk on the podcast already about that, about your circle of influence and like whatever's nearest to you and being able to make a difference in that spot. That's where authentic masculinity actually shines, not in trying to do stuff in Afghanistan, but like not against like your role and like the people who have gone into those places. Right. But most of us, it's not our call. Most of us, it's like, who's right there at your doorstep and like how to be perceptive and sensitive to that and being willing to jump into that, and,
even when it's awkward, even when it feels weird, even
with my own son or my daughter and stuff like that, and not leaving it to my wife or somebody else, but to whoever is right there. And I think there are also some men that I know, some of the best men that I know, have never read the theology of the body, right? But they're living it because they are ordered with the gift of the Holy Spirit.
They haven't. But
the Holy Spirit.
Sounded like, I thought you said you haven't. I know you've read it plenty of times.
Well, no, I have read it, but there are some men that I know that have never read it, but they're living it out. Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, correct. I don't want people to think, well, if I don't read this 700-page book, I'll never be able to live. No, it's being inspired by the one who made you for himself and who gave you the gift of your wife and your children, and being submissive to that Holy Spirit is what forms us in those moments. Yes. And there are a lot of beautiful things to learn by reading and then starting to put those things into practice as well.
Amen. Drew?
I can't wait to listen to this episode again with some pen and paper. This was a lot of fun.
I think you blew Drew's brains out with the
I don't know
with your savant comment.
Fruitfulness.
I waited 4 seasons to say that.
I saw his eyes roll back in his head.
Yeah.
Like roll.
Somebody was speaking Spanish earlier. we just hit the gamut today. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us today, Brian.
It's a joy.
For more information, again, go to echocommunity.us. Check it out. Man, this was great. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for being here, guys. It was a gift to be with you all today.
Praise God.
All right. Man, what another great show today. I want to thank all of our listeners for spending the time with us. I want to challenge you, if you've enjoyed this, please share this show with another husband or father that you know, or leave us a review on Google, Apple, or Spotify. We'll see you next time.
I rise up like smoke from a gun, like a brand new sun.